Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Michael Sandler. If you've ever wondered why you're getting sicker and unhealthier despite the latest in medicine, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, DNA testing, diets and supplements, then do we have the show for you. Today we'll be talking with Colin Campbell, PhD, Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry at Cornell University, say that 10 times fast, and co-author of the best-selling book, The China Study, and his latest book, Whole. His legacy, the China-Cornell-Oxford Project, has been acknowledged as the most comprehensive study of health and nutrition ever conducted. He's also authored more than 300 peer-reviewed research papers. Today I want to talk about why the emperor has no clothes, or why the studies, the science, and the medicine we've come to love and trust may not be quite what we think they are, especially when it comes to nutrition. But then I want to empower us and talk about what works, why, and what we can do to live happier, healthier, and quite possibly longer lives, and even return to perfect health, despite having disease or even the big C. Plus, we'll talk about apples, dairy farms, peanuts, and what in the world 4 blind men and an elephant have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Colin. Are you ready to shine?
Thank you. Yes, definitely.
Woohoo! So before we begin, what in the world does a peanut have to do with anything?
Well, it has a lot to do with lots of things all over the world. I think you referred to my early research.
Yeah, your story.
Yeah, so when I got involved in research after being at MIT for 3 years and working on a somewhat different problem, but in 1965, I had my first faculty position. And at that time, there was a considerable interest in this country about this mold toxin, if you will, that had been discovered that causes liver cancer. At the same time when that was being discussed, I also had an invitation to join my senior colleague in the Philippines, to go to the Philippines and organize a nationwide program of feeding malnourished children.
Oh, cool.
What we wanted to do there basically was to make sure these children got enough protein. And that was consistent with my own belief because my doctoral dissertation, all the rest of it, was in the idea that the more protein, the better. So we were concerned that people in a poor country like the Philippines weren't getting enough protein. So we set about sort of talking with ourselves about what's a good source of protein that's convenient for them.
Yeah.
And a peanut really was. It's a plant that can be grown in most countries of the world, and it's a good source of protein. But there was a problem. The peanut, compared to other crops, was the one crop that was infested at times with this mold, called Aspergillus flavus, to put a technical name on it.
Yep.
And that mold, in turn, produced a compound called aflatoxin. And aflatoxin at that time had been shown to be the most potent chemical carcinogen ever identified. So we had a serious dilemma here. You know, when we're going to make available, let's say, a good source of protein for these folks in the Philippines as a means to remedy the health of their children, we had to resolve that problem first. You know,
that toxin's very easy to get in peanut butter, for instance, because you wouldn't even have the quality control to pull out the moldiest peanuts.
That's right. And the Philippines, I don't want to go into those details, but their quality control wasn't that great. But it was good enough for me to learn that, in fact, why it is that peanut butter in the Philippines was so heavily contaminated with aflatoxin compared to us in the West. And so I was working on that. I set up a laboratory and figured out how to analyze this aflatoxin in human urine, for example, of these kids, and to see if they're getting exposed to all that kind of stuff. But in reality, I also saw something else. And that was in the Philippines, where liver cancer, that's the cancer caused by consuming this, supposedly, caused by this material. What I saw was something that was kind of surprising. Most people in the Philippines consume far less protein than we do. Okay? So in any case, we saw something a bit surprising.
Yeah.
The majority of the family in the Philippines were consuming much less protein than what we do in the West.
Okay.
And of course, we're all about, making sure they get more protein.
Mm-hmm.
But the few families who were consuming adequate amounts of protein, like we do in the West, they were the ones who seemed to have the children most likely to get liver cancer. So all of a sudden, these two ideas were together. On the one hand, I'm working with, this compound that causes liver cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Setting up a laboratory. And on the other hand, I'm learning that the peanuts, have, unfortunately, too much aflatoxin in them. So we had to resolve the problem. But more to the point, the idea that people who consume the most protein, like us, the good levels,
Yep.
their children were more likely to get liver cancer. That was pretty striking. More protein, more cancer. That was not in my background. I never suspected something like that. But nonetheless, it was there. And then there was a study that came from India at that time,
Mm-hmm.
showing that experimental animal studies, also given aflatoxin and different levels of protein, the ones given the most protein got the liver cancer.
So in other words,
So-
the protein was acting as kind of a key to the door to cancer. It was
Exactly.
opening the door.
Exactly, and catalyzing it, just sort of, pushing it ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I should tell you, the Indian workers themselves did not believe their own results. So it remained totally obscure
Yep.
to even them for the years after that. But nonetheless, because I had seen something that I could interpret sort of like this in the humans and the
Mm-hmm.
children, at the same time this experimental animal data were available, I organized a project then to study that. Is it really true that protein actually increases cancer? And so we spent the next 27 years with public taxpayer money. That's the National Institutes of Health and some other cancer institutes. I was well funded for the next 27 years to begin to investigate, does protein have anything to do with cancer? And what we learned was beyond belief.
So let's dive into that, because this is for people listening to this. I'm picture people shuddering right now, because this is pulling out. It's not ripping out one pillar of the foundation. It's pulling the whole foundation out from what we understand as we need protein, we need quality protein. I went to the gym this morning, and there's signs everywhere that says, if you want to get the most out of your workout, make sure you get a good quality protein drink when you finish for your health.
Well, I have to say that's really nonsense. And let me just see if I can do some shorthand on this.
Okay.
Protein is present in animal food. We all know that. It's also present in plant food. And most people tend to think that protein is almost synonymous with meat.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Meat has a lot of protein. It has a so-called high-quality protein. That means it can turn on growth of cells faster, including cancer cells.
Ooh.
I don't call that high quality. But in any case, it turns out that protein in plants is enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's ideal. If we're using a whole food plant-based diet, we get all the protein we need. And part of our problem, if I can jump way ahead in our research here, cancer tends to get turned on when we start adding more protein to our diet in the form of animal foods. And so, usually if we're just only eating a whole food plant-based diet, we can easily get 8 to 10% of our calories as protein. That's not a problem. That's what we need. We can actually get more than that, but nonetheless, we get our 8 to 10%. Most of us on average, and that's 95% of us according to the figures, we're consuming lots and lots of animal foods because we've always believed that more protein the better. And so our average protein is not 8 to 10%. It's at least double that on average. 3 times that, maybe 4 times that for some folks. So we're loading our diet up with a lot of protein coming from animal foods when we don't need it. We just don't need it.
Are there any studies that show, and maybe this is a perfect time to go into the research and what you've been finding, not just in the research, but about the research system itself, because I know I've looked for it in the past and I couldn't find any studies that talk that show a protein deficiency.
That's right. Well, I mean, there have been studies back in the 50s and 60s, if you will, where they talked about protein deficiency. And then under those circumstances, it was said that the condition that children would get was called kwashiorkor.
Mm-hmm.
But quite frankly, that was a big discussion during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But it was not really true. Kwashiorkor is really hardly ever seen in children. So protein deficiency, quite frankly, doesn't exist. You're right. It doesn't exist.
So then let's talk about how this came about, how the idea of protein came about, and maybe we should go into reductionism from here.
Yeah, we tend to think about just what I said. Protein causes cancer when fed in excess of the amount we need. I mean, protein is an essential nutrient. Of that, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
We get all as I said, from plants. When we start adding on top of that, we're adding the wrong kind of protein. Mm-hmm. And that's when the cancer goes. Now, mind you, I just talked about protein specifically, but in reality, as we started going into this research over the years, it was clear to me that protein doesn't act just all by itself. When we consume higher levels of protein from animal foods, we're displacing the consumption of nutrients from plant foods, in effect. And so our diet becomes quite rich in animal-based foods, milk, meat, and eggs, if you will. And so we're displacing all the good stuff from plants. And then that leads to the next question you just referred to. These nutrients all work together inside of a cell in just miraculous ways.
Yes.
It's like a symphony. It's beautiful. I call it holism.
And so two questions that come out of this. The first is displacement. By displacement, are you meaning that literally it pushes things out of the way and blocks nutritional channel, or that you're full and so you don't eat the most nutrient-dense food because you've got your belly's filled with the milk, eggs, and meat, and so you stop without getting your veggies in?
They're both true, what you just said. Mm-hmm. But in reality, yes. The total calorie consumption we need each day is more or less a zero-sum game. It varies depending on whether they're exercise and this and that, but it's sort of a zero-sum game. If we start then providing those calories from animal food up to, let's say, 60, 70, 80% of the total calories, then we're displacing all the calories that would otherwise come from plant foods. That's what the problem is here.
So let's the second part of it, when we were talking about, you mentioned the term holism. Maybe we should jump ahead and talk about an apple, because I was fascinated because you talk about specifically vitamin C in an apple being such a beautiful thing. However, when you try to pull the vitamin C out of the apple, there isn't actually that much there. It's everything working together.
Right. Absolutely. In other words, the whole apple has a certain amount of so-called vitamin C-like activity. If we then take the vitamin C out of that apple, we find that it's only about 5% of the total what we presume to be vitamin C is there. So there's lots of other stuff going on, and part of it has to do with the fact that vitamin C its activity is being enhanced by other things that's coming along with it. And there's other vitamin C-like compounds. Yes, fantastic.
So maybe it's a good place to look at this argument of it's something. Well, tell us about whole. What motivated you to write this? Because this is an argument against reductionism and the current system of understanding nutrition and science.
Well, I've taught nutritional biochemistry as well as just biochemistry itself for many years. And what I discovered in that exercise is that in science we tend to talk about one nutrient at a time.
Right, like vitamin C from the apple.
Right, or one mechanism at a time, we say, or one disease outcome at a time. So we're focused on one thing at a time. Maybe you could call it the magic bullet approach. And when we do that, that's how we learn about the chemical and physical properties of those things that we're studying. That's true, and it's helpful. That's no problem with that. But that's helpful. But when we take that and take nutrients out and put them in a pill, like a vitamin supplement, they don't work. On the other hand, when we leave them in the whole food, that's when they do work.
So, for example, vitamin E you talk about in your book, and how helpful vitamin E can be in our bloodstream, but then when we go and ingest vitamin E, it actually raises cancer levels.
It can, yes. That's the problem. I mean, the whole nutrient supplement industry, I challenge. I mean, it's now, I don't know, it's more than $30 billion a year they've been very successful in selling a product. But now we have lots of evidence those nutrient supplements are not working. They certainly cannot, under any circumstance, remedy a bad diet.
And
it just doesn't work.
Is the biggest reason that this reductionist approach of taking it to absurdum, to the smallest finite level, it doesn't work because it is such you have a diagram in here that takes the Krebs cycle and blows it out and then blows it out until you'd need a electron microscope almost just to read the diagram of how complex this system is.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, biological complexity cannot be overemphasized. Mm-hmm. I mean, for example, the image I like now these days, we have between 10 and 100 trillion cells in our body. And every cell, the cell can sit comfortably on the head of a pin, and we can't see it. And so we got between 10 and 100 trillion of those things. But every cell is like a universe. It's just as much complexity. It's got all kinds of parts going on, right? All kinds of things happening in the cell. And the number of reactions and events and so forth, components that are there is beyond our comprehension. A cell is like a universe. We got between 10 and 100 trillion of those universes in our body. And for us to come along rather arrogantly, if I can add that word, come along arrogantly and try to stick in one thing at a time at a certain dose that has nothing to do with reality, we get in trouble. That's the basis for the whole drug industry, by the way. The drug industry has compounded the problem. It's bad enough taking one nutrient at a time and trying to solve problems. But when we put a drug there, and that's an unnatural compound, by the way, for the most part, it's an unnatural. Our bodies have never seen that before. We put that in to solve problems. That really, looking back on it, it's quite foolish. Well, I don't mean to say that some drugs aren't useful from time to time. It's just that it's not the way to go.
Well, yeah, you talk about in the book how there's no such thing as a side effect, that they're all effects.
That's right.
Particularly, you had a statistic in the book. The number 3 leading cause of death, I believe, is death by medicine. And that's either by medicine or procedures or medicines interacting with each other.
Exactly. And incidentally, the CDC, who lists the top 10 causes of death, they never list that. I mean, why aren't they putting that number 3? I've revised those numbers even further, because if you determine a proportion of the heart disease and cancer, that's number 1 and 2. If you determine the proportion of those diseases that could be prevented by this kind of diet, then the number 1 cause of death is nutritional ignorance.
Wow. Okay, so
By
before we
far.
jump into nutrition, I want to cover a few more things. Then we're going to go down that road, because I think this is very powerful for people. Genetics is a term that's come up so much, not just in the literature, it's everywhere lately. I read something horrifying in your book. I don't know if it takes place. I've heard of it taking place with adults. I pray it doesn't take place with kids, which is parents finding out that their daughters have a specific gene for breast cancer and having early breast cancer removal. I know of people who have breast cancer removal just because of gene testing. And this is just mind-blowing and a little bit scary to me.
Yeah, it is. It's a very tragic dilemma, I guess you could say, in one sense. People here, mothers here, if they got the gene for breast cancer, it's a BRCA1 or 2, and that gene also gives a higher rate of ovarian cancer too. So a mother, understandably, totally understandably, is concerned because it's being passed on to their daughters. So now when their daughters, before they get into the menstrual period of their lives, and I've had calls myself from mothers, should I have my 10-year-old girl have her breast removed? I mean, it's a really, I don't know, it's a very, very troubling thing. And I can understand mothers being concerned about that. And it's not the mothers that I'm concerned about, it's the scientists behind this not studying this question as adequately as they otherwise might do so.
Please explain what that means. Why is it, if a geneticist is saying that you have a disposition for this, why are you arguing we shouldn't take that preemptive step?
Well, what I'm saying is this. And incidentally, I'm not saying that this gene is that we can forget about it, because we can't.
Okay.
I mean, everything starts with genes. It just so happens that kind of gene is, it has a pretty powerful potency. It almost like drives through the forest, regardless of what else we do, in a sense. But it only involves this very small proportion, a very small number of women, for starters. But let me add something more to get to your question.
Yeah.
Even those with those kind of genes, it's not the presence of the gene that necessarily causes the problem. It's the expression of the gene.
I think that's important. If you can explain what that means to a layperson, because that's hitting the nail on the head.
Okay, so all of us have genes everything in our bodies start with genes. All the reactions, diseases, and health conditions, we all start with genes. We got 25,000 of them. We got combinations working together. There's infinite, genetic basis for things. We all have some genes in our body we'd rather not have. Okay, we don't necessarily know what they are, of course, but we'd rather not have them. Well, now what we're learning from nutrition is the major way that the body uses to keep those genes under control. So, even we've got some mischievous genes, like you have heart disease, cancer, whatever.
Yep.
If we're doing the right kind of genes, we keep them, they don't grow. They don't grow out. Like weeds in a garden or weeds in the yard. I'm not suggesting go too far with that analogy, but in any case, when you have everything flourishing in the right way, nourished properly, then even those mischievous genes, in most cases, are kept under control.
So switching gears from genes, let's talk briefly about the war on cancer and what the statistics are now. How are we doing in the last 50 years on cancer?
Well, most people, actually, it's funny you should write that. I'm writing a new paper just as you rang the phone today on that whole question. Trying to sort out some of that information. But most people would say, professionals, by the way, as well, would say that the war on cancer has failed. Largely failed. And I think that's reasonably accurate assessment of things. There are some changes in cancer rates that look a little more promising in recent times, since about 2000.
Yeah.
Lung cancer is coming down because probably we're quitting smoking. Breast cancer, surprisingly, is coming down a little bit. I'm not sure why. I don't know whether it's a fluke or not. But in any case, there's some cancer going up. Basically, the cancer load amongst us in the West is still far higher than it should be. And so we haven't learned how to treat cancer very well. There's a few stories about some chemotherapy agents working, but not really. There's a good review that just came out, a very sophisticated, very professional review that was published not too long ago to show that chemotherapy, for example, one of the major ways we treat cancer, is not working. It's not working. And so we have that problem. And here, the biggest problem of all is that the establishment research community, of which I've been a part, and the clinical practice community, they have never taken nutrition seriously. So as a result, we're not doing the kind of research we need to do just to see how powerful this nutritional effect can be. And I happen to believe, on the basis of the research we did, it's a very powerful effect. And so the war on cancer, by ignoring nutrition, is not only the war on cancer, it's doctors in general. It's the whole medical system. They're ignoring the most important science of all, by far. And the nutritional effect, I get excited about it because this same kind of diet just resolves all kinds of problems and illnesses. So sort of simultaneously, it's amazing. And yet the doctors aren't being trained in this area. And we're not doing the kind of research we need to do.
Why is that? We discussed off air briefly. I was saying that I thought that doctors get 4 hours, and you said if they're lucky, some get 4, some get 1 in med school. What is going on? Why aren't we looking at? We've all heard since Schoolhouse Rock, since watching cartoons as a kid, we've all heard we are what we eat.
I know, because Hippocrates said that many years ago. It's a fancy thing to say, but nobody, or very few people, really believe it. Certainly professionals, I think, don't believe it.
Let food be thy medicine. Yes.
Yeah, right. And so, Hippocrates knew this well. So did Pythagoras, the guy that did the triangle math.
Yep.
and other ancient Greeks, they sort of knew this. But as we got into the sort of industrial age and we started isolating parts of cells and bodies and so forth, started thinking about drugs, started doing this and that, we were always interested in discovering magic bullets. We can solve this problem or that problem. And we can eat the food that, is the sweetest. Mm-hmm. And it has the most fat and all that. So we started eating the wrong food. And then we're going to fix our illnesses that we get from that food by using these drugs and so forth. So the whole medical system started actually very much focused on a reductionist approach. We're going to have a specific drug to do this if we get that problem. It's called targeted drug therapy, one of the most mischievous terms I've heard of in recent years.
Targeted drug therapy.
Yeah, and that's the big mantra right now for the drug industry. Mm-hmm. I'm saying it's wrong. I mean, I would have asked someone who's going to be living at that time to come back 30, 40 years later and just ask.
So with the problem, we don't want to go too far down that road, but the problem being you can't target one thing. It's a complete impossibility.
No, that's right. As I described before, that each of these cells have this beyond comprehensible, it's not even comprehensible amount of complexity in there. And we're going to take and just try to hit one chemical in there or one event. That's ridiculous. Especially, whereas if we eat the right food, nature knows how to use this food. It knows how to use what proportions of the food in the form of nutrients. It knows how to use them and distribute around and do the things that needs to be done. How can we beat that? But here's the point. Yeah. We can do that very cheaply. That doesn't cost a lot of money. All we need to do is eat the food.
I'm picturing now instead of pharmaceutical reps coming into the med schools, I'm picturing your local greengrocer coming in and wheeling in the iceberg lettuce.
Some of that is actually being entertained now. Really? But not exactly that way, but in many ways. I don't know whether you've seen the film. You saw the film Forks Over Knives?
Yes,
maybe?
yes.
Well, there's another film my oldest son directs. Just came out in theater last June. And he's got a whole system now set up around the country, setting up around the country. The name of the film was Plant Pure Nation.
Okay.
And in that film, it starts off with my presenting to the legislature in the state of Kentucky. My good friend, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and I did that. But then my son was invited back to see if we couldn't help them out, maybe introducing some legislation that would help them to. I mean, the 100 senators, when we spoke there, were quite enthusiastic. They liked it. So we kind of tested the system, or my son did. Okay, here's some legislation. How about voting on this? And see how it goes. Well, they turned it down when the lobbyists learned about it. That's the film. And I won't tell the rest of the story, but it's a kind of an exciting kind of film in a way. So as a result of that film, now he is organizing these, so he calls them pods around the country. These are sort of small wellness groups in different areas.
Grassroots.
Yeah, it's a real grassroots movement. It really is. It's quite exciting. And so hospitals are now buying in this too. Most of my lectures in recent years, I've given about 600 lectures or more than that now, since the China study came out, and most of my lectures now to medical schools. So I don't want, I have to really emphasize, I like our doctors. They went to school to help people. It's that simple. But they weren't offered the information they needed to know. They were offered information so that people could sell products like drug companies. That's all they got to know. And so I'm finding, it's very gratifying. I have to tell you, the number of physicians I've run into in this country when I go to medical schools, that's fantastic. There's almost no better feeling in the world to see nutritionists saying, hey, what is this you're talking about? I want to know something. I mean, they're pretty good, scientific background. They want to know, what is this? Defend what you're talking about. When they really grasp it, they get it.
So let's go from there. That's a perfect segue. Let's talk about the China study and what you found and what this means for us today.
Well, going back to our little story in the Philippines, when I was focusing on a very specific objective, why does protein cause cancer in rats of all things? My God, I mean, this is kind of crazy. and we're getting to the biochemistry of it.
And I guess I'll stop you there because you're saying it's crazy, but if they haven't read the book, you pose at least two good arguments. First off, when we see something in rats, it's because you're giving them 1,000. It could be just that you're giving them 1,000 times the dose. And secondly, if it shows up in a rat, we're assuming it shows up in the human, but that's crazy because it may not even show up in a mouse. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yes, that's one way to put it. That's true. So in any case, we worked on this very detailed thing. I mean, that was my training, my background. I was from the farm, by the way, milking cows, as you probably know. And so the idea that casein, the main protein in cow's milk, turns on cancer, which we were doing. I mean, that was bizarre. And so,
and that just for a brief note for people, that's also if you're, because I've been for many years, almost my whole life, vegan or vegetarian, and casein is actually if you're a processed food vegan or vegetarian, it's in a lot. It's in your veggie burgers. It's in your veggie cheeses. It's in your veggie pizzas that you love. They put casein in.
Right. That's right. We're enamored. We're wedded to that whole concept of, but casein is sort of like glue. You got to hold things together. So they're not doing it to make us healthier, I don't think. I think they're doing it primarily because they're making a product, that holds together, if you will. But in any case, from those days and starting to explore this question in some detail, I was focused. I was a reductionist scientist. Let's face it. I was looking at things that way we do in science. That's the money I got was focused on that idea. And when I started thinking about it years later, the reason I was doing it, I can see it now. I'm trying to find the mechanism, or I'm trying to find the nutrient, or I'm trying to try some chemical that can be targeted to do something. That's the overhang, the umbrella within which I was working. But I finally realized after seeing all this interplay of mechanisms and so forth, hey, there's a bigger story here. It's called nature. And when you step back off and you look at all these parts they're great information, because when you really get to know the parts, then you begin to understand the whole. So reductionist science is good. I want to make that clear. Reduction, because it gives us a fundamental understanding of how things work. But I had the good fortune of working in sort of that area, and then finally realizing that, especially coming back from the Philippines, seeing poor children, for example, who are dying, not getting the right food. I mean, I was very much affected by that early in my career. So I'm looking at the research from my perspective, both as a scientist looking at details, but also always being pulled back. What does this mean for people?
That's unique.
That was really exciting.
What gives you, was it growing up on the dairy farm? Why is it that you weren't stuck in the detail and were able to give your book is whole, a holistic, a step back and look at the big picture approach?
Well, to be honest I sort of asked myself that. I was raised on a farm, as I said. I was out in the field. I was in nature. We were baling hay, where I was raking hay, I was milking cows, all that kind of stuff. I was the first one in my family to go to college, let alone go to graduate school. My dad only had a couple years of formal education. So to even go to college for me was like going out into space or something. So I was naive. I think that was an advantage. I remained sort of naive at times, and I kind of would take my step in a puddle of water where maybe I shouldn't. You could go in this direction, that direction. And because I'm thinking, this has got to mean something for nature. What about the person who gets cancer? What about the person who gets heart disease? My wife's mother died of colon cancer. She was 51. And then I learned something about that was really very sad. She didn't have the insurance coverage. For one thing, to get the treatment she needed to get, and she was given a laxative and sent home. 51 years old. Wow. My dad, who was otherwise outdoors all the time, he nonetheless had his first heart attack when he was 62, a fatal attack when he was 70. His brother had a fatal attack in 58. And their father, my grandfather, had a stroke in his 73. So heart disease runs in my father's family. Cancer runs in my wife's family, right? So I'm confirmed, and then I see in the Philippines, we're working on cancer there too. And then all of a sudden realize people are getting cancer and heart disease and diabetes far more often than they need to. So you're talking about, you can't, I mean, how can someone ignore that? So I'm working in the details, but I'm looking on the trees, and I'm also realizing I'm in a forest. The forest is quite beautiful if you back and look at it. I mean, it's just nature at work. You just can't get away from it. There's no way.
So once you realized there was a forest to work on, what'd you do from there?
Well, it was almost as if it kept pulling me in that direction because I do have a great deal of respect for nature. I like the outdoors.
Yep.
I like all of that kind of stuff. And when we started looking at the principle, the mechanisms and how they interrelate, like nutrition controlling genes, we did that in a day when that idea wasn't entertained very much. I learned that that individual chemicals don't work the same on that mechanism we may be studying, in a test tube. It doesn't work the same as it does in the whole body. You look at populations of people, there's a disconnect between what we're doing in the laboratory and what we're doing in whole populations. And so I was always conscious of this idea of that disconnect. We got to rationalize it in some way. We got to figure this darn thing out. And so eventually, you start, we could do things like reverse cancer. Can you believe that? They've never been done but with a nutrient. We give the animals casein, in this case, turn on the cancer. We take it away and the cancer goes away. I mean, that's pretty dramatic. You can't forget that. And so then you ask why. How does that work? Well, we found all kinds of mechanisms. It wasn't one mechanism. No such thing as targeted drug therapy. Forget that. That's a foolish idea. We started to learn really that all these mechanisms far beyond the number we actually examined, but we examined one by one by one. And I kept looking for the elusive key mechanism, and finally decided, hey, there is no such thing as a key mechanism.
The key mechanism is the whole.
Yeah, that's right. They're all working together. Well, then I say to myself, who's directing that? It's really nature. Some other folks might have other ideas about how to interpret that, but basically, it's everything working together. It's just fascinating. And so they say, well, what do I do? What do I do in my everyday life? Well, I eat the whole food. Just eat the goddamn food. And eat the right food. That's all.
So let's go into that. Before we do, real briefly, what was the China study?
Well, the China study was named after the project we did in China. And this was back about 1980 when our two countries were first starting to talk to each other. And the first senior scientist from China to come to the United States ended up in my laboratory. Fascinating guy. And he wanted to know something about cancer. And he had established some reputation in China for some of the work that he was doing at the time. And so when he was there, we learned that his government had just published a series of an atlas of maps of cancer distribution in all the 2,500 counties around China. And so these beautiful color-coded maps became available. They were featured on Nova TV at that time in this country 4 times. I mean, in those days, anything about China, the American public wanted to see it right now. So that was one of the programs that sort of came on our TV screens. It turned out my Chinese friend, the director of that Cancer Atlas project in China during the 1970s, was a good friend of his. I said, oh, why he had just come to the States himself, down at NIH. So I picked up the phone, we talked, we got together, his friend, my Chinese friend, and then we got really the best of the best epidemiologists in the world at Oxford University, Sir Richard Peto and Sir Richard Dahl. We formed a little team, and then we went to China. Our question was this. We wanted to do a survey of what turned out to be 130 villages around the country. And so we wanted to collect blood samples and urine samples and food samples. We wanted to ask questions. We also got access the government gave to us, all the other diseases, not just cancer. So we had this enormous opportunity. We went there, we collected blood samples, and we analyzed it. There were about 24 laboratories around the world that participated in this. We directed it. And so we gathered this tremendous amount of information. And before we had a chance to interpret very much of it, the New York Times got wind of it. And so Jane Brody came up. She was a fairly well-known New York Times reporter at the time, also a graduate of Cornell. So she came up and talked to me about this. So we got a cover story in the New York Times Science section about 1990, and the Saturday Evening Post had a cover story, and USA Today had a front page. I mean, it made quite a bit of noise at the time. So it created a lot of interest, without a doubt. That's now jump ahead. That was 1990, 91. We're just out organizing some of these data and having a look at what's going on here. What does it tell us? And by the way, before I get on, well, no, I come back to that. So we looked at the data. Finally, in 2005, I'm getting a better idea in my mind about what all this means. We wrote the book. My son and I did. And we spent close to 3 years on that, just working on it really hard, because it was kind of a hard story to sell. But he was a really good writer, by the way, and so we worked on that. And we got the book done, and then we had signed a contract. All the big publishers, or 11 of the big publishers they visited, they wanted us to take out all the references. They didn't want us to put the references in there. They wanted me to make up about 60 to 70% of the book with recipes. Well, tell us how you do it. And then finally they disagreed, and they said, "Are you saying that this applies to all the different diseases?" I said, "Yes." They said, "That's impossible." No, that's not. You should. There's supposed to be a recipe or a prescription for each and every different disease. Like they thought I was crazy. So we walked away from that. A couple of them gave us advances, but I didn't want that. We went to a small publisher who allowed us to do that, because he was just starting out and he was more open to risky ideas. And so we gave him the manuscript he wanted to do with it. We signed a contract, and we gave him 200 suggested titles.
Yep.
None of them was the China study, not one. But he came back and he had this China study. And the reason he did it, what I just said, the reason he did that, because the China study had gotten quite a lot of publicity.
Makes sense.
It was a brand already at that time, just about. So he wanted to name the book that because he thought he wouldn't sell very much books. And he was anxious to, he wanted to sell the book. And I first objected. I said, I don't want that title. It wasn't our title. I didn't want it. But he said, "Look, you signed it. I have the right to name it." That's what it came to. Okay, I said I'm going to blame you in the future for difficulties. So it was named the China Study because of that, just to sell the book. And what's turned out now, of course, it has its own recognition, its own. But let me come back to a point.
Yes.
The China Study, obviously involving humans, right? That kind of study, we cannot determine causality between cause and effect. What we had was just an ungodly amount of correlations. This related to that, all kinds of things. We had a huge volume, the most comprehensive study ever done in the history of medicine, and certainly the largest collection of correlations. I knew you can't use correlation theorem for causation. However, where the China study
can you give an example of that? Because I'm thinking now of smoking, and they used that as an argument for many years, causality. Right. Can you give a good example of that?
Yeah, I can give you one. If you look at breast cancer rates in different countries around the world, or colon cancer rates, if you will, same sort of thing, the higher the consumption of fat in the diet, the higher is the rate of these diseases. Really nice, pretty straight line. Lots of points. It all works out that way.
Yep.
But we can't conclude that fat causes breast cancer or colon cancer. We can't quite do that, because lots of things happen when the fat intake goes up in different countries. So do the number of telephone poles. So we might just, they get more breast cancer because they're closer to more telephone poles. Or maybe it's not that, maybe it's some other nutrient, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So, we can't use correlation. I know this well. And we have to, we can't infer causation from causality, if you will. All these examples. But here's where the China study became really powerful.
Yes.
We had a captive population, in a sense, who were consuming a diet mostly plant-based. And so we collected all kinds of information. Now, in this case, we can use correlations as long as you clean them up and they're not confounded by, the wrong thing. We can look for patterns of correlations. Compare that with what we had done in the laboratory. So I was really interested to see if this in this human study, if the data we got in the human study was consistent with what I was seeing in the laboratory, and it was.
So what were the things you were finding?
Well, for one thing, as soon as people start putting animal food in their diet, their cholesterol start to go up.
So communities that had more money, for instance.
That's right. Exactly. And, people who tend to consume, in rural China, the amount of animal food they're consuming is almost zero. Maybe occasional feast days, that was it. As you move into the more urban areas, more money, a little more affluence, so forth, they start, one of the first things when families do in all societies, when they get a little money, they go buy themselves some meat. Because, it's a food that is valued, has been for centuries, eons. And so they get that because that gives them a little affluence, if you will. So they're buying that kind of food. And then all of a sudden, like in China, Americans come in with McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and stuff like that. It's the place to go. In other countries, it may have been a different sort of dynamic. But nonetheless, people started eating that kind of food. And they also started eating a lot of processed food. Because industries now can make, donuts. They can make this, they can make that. And those foods aren't what I'm talking about because they're not the whole food, doesn't have all the good stuff in it. So you got a combination of the animal foods and these highly processed foods causing a lot of problems. And so, I was fortunate in a sense to have had so much time in the laboratory. And so much, adequate amounts of funding from the U.S. government. I must say, I got to give credit for that whole process. NIH was fantastic. They provided funding for this. But I had this opportunity of seeing what's going on in the laboratory, all these details, and then had this opportunity to go to China, a unique population. Wow, that combination was just a little bit beyond belief.
So you're finding in a whole foods diet, a diet that's primarily plant-based, you are finding lower diabetes, heart disease, risk of cancer, stroke, maybe even MS. What were you finding?
Well, we had a limit as to the kind of diseases that we could look at in the China data because they had a limited number of diseases, about 4 dozen or so, a little more than that, count different age groups. But in any case, all the diseases for which we had data, they were actually mortality rates. They were not incidence rates, number one. They were mortality rates. That's a very definite outcome.
End game, yes.
Yeah, that's a definite end game. So the numbers there you can count on to a great extent. Also, we restricted our survey to people between the age of 34, between ages 35 and 64. Because older folks, the ascertainment of death, for example, is not very reliable in many cases. So between the ages of 35 and 64, and this was a suggestion of my good friends from Oxford University, let's restrict it to that.
Okay.
Let's collect information all that we can get, and let's do the best we can measuring this accurately, right? And then we ended up with a big monograph, of all this really rich data. It was fun.
So you've restricted it to 34 to 64, you said?
35 to 64 years of age.
35 to 64. And then what did you start seeing?
Well, we've had both men and women, of course. We had a total of 65 counties.
Okay.
They were carefully selected to represent the full range of mortality rates for 7 different cancers. So we wanted to take advantage of the big range of cancer rates for China.
Makes sense.
And, some cancers in certain areas of China, like esophageal cancer, was 400 times higher than the lowest rate. Stomach cancer, I think, was something like 200 times higher in the highest county compared to the lowest county. So when you have a big range like this is a good this is an essential scientific tool.
From science perspective, this is fun. From a science point of view, this is fun. You've got some great data points to work with.
That's right. We got a range to look at. We got all this information, and some things, even the cancer that was had the smallest range, actually was breast cancer, but still, from the lowest county to the highest county was a 13-fold difference.
Wow.
Heart disease. There were places in China where we had records. They had gone through something like 260-some thousand death certificates, not a single case of heart disease.
Wow.
So, then we saw things like in certain areas of China, the levels of blood cholesterol, which is indicative of risk, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a cause of heart disease, it's indicative of the kind of diet. It's related to heart disease to some extent on a broad scale. But in any case, we saw cholesterol levels average 127 milligrams per deciliter, 127.
Mm-hmm.
In this country, it was like 220, 230. Actually, I had been led to believe at that time that, or I didn't necessarily believe it, but there was some evidence to show that if you get below 150,
mm-hmm.
you have a higher rate of suicide, maybe even a higher rate of colon cancer. There were some silly studies that showed that. So we get this information that the average is 127, way below 150.
And nobody's going crazy.
Well, everybody's going crazy, and decided, they look at me, hey, you're crazy. What is this here? Yeah, nobody's going crazy. It's true.
And I mean, nobody, just like you said, people thinking if your cholesterol level's too low, you're going nuts.
That's right. So the range actually for, and this is range of means, by the way, the range of means for all the different villages. Mm-hmm. We had 2 villages in every county. We did that on purpose so we could determine homogeneity of value within a site. Anyhow, the range was from like 80 milligrams per deciliter. That was an average for a town, 80.
Wow.
To a high of about 170. So their high was near our low. So this all of a sudden became a fantastic population study. Mm-hmm. Then you could look in that range. You could sort of ask yourself, what causes counties to have higher values than 80? As you go up from 80 to 90, 100, is there anything that's associated with that? Mm-hmm. Yes, there is. The higher the fat intake, the higher the animal food intake, the lower the fresh vegetables, cholesterol is going up. Not just cholesterol, but a lot of other things that are indicative of disease. You sort of put all this together.
Yeah.
And that's where you begin to all of a sudden see. I said, holy smoly, what this says is that the closer we get to a plant-based diet, the healthier we're going to be. We didn't have proof mm-hmm. that everybody had to be 100% to enjoy good health, and we still don't have that proof. But what we do have is that the odds say the closer you get to it, and I argue, too, for 100% myself,
yeah,
because I'm playing the odds a bit, but I'm also doing something else. And that is when you start eating this way,
yeah,
you don't add back a lot of oil and all that stuff, you don't tease yourself. You eat this way consistently, your taste preferences change.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's the way you want to eat.
So then let's
there's no side effects.
Let's dive into this briefly. What is a whole foods plant-based diet? What does that look like? What does it include, and what does it exclude?
Well, obviously it includes vegetables, mm-hmm. fruits, grains, whole grains.
Yep.
Legumes. Some people will call that a separate category. Some people want to call it vegetables. But in any case, legumes, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and done, I think, in moderation. I'm not talking, the whole nuts. Anything that's whole, the whole food.
Gotcha.
And under those circumstances, when you take that, mm-hmm. and people can combine it more or less any way they want. I don't get too caught up in numbers, but they can kind of combine how much, whether they have spinach or Swiss chard or big greens. That's their choice. I mean, yep. We don't have, that kind of nonsense we get in arguments over. Grains.
White rice, okay? I mean, I would assume.
No, it's not really. White rice is not the best thing because you don't want to use refined carbohydrate products.
Good point.
Right. I mean, so it's better not to use that. Use whole grain rice.
Okay.
Whole grains of all other kinds of grains as well. And just let it come together. Everybody can have their own preferences, and the kinds of meals that people can have mm-hmm. is really infinite. The combinations are literally infinite. Use spices and herbs and stuff like this, and there's a lot of chefs now coming on board with this, and they're using their skills, to create some really very tasty foods.
Things like veggie oils, I would assume, way out.
Well, yeah, we don't add oil to our diet. No, that's not good. There's 2 things happen. Mm-hmm. When you start adding oil to it, for one thing, you retain that preference for using stuff. It's sort of like smoking. You smoke 1 cigarette or 2. When you're trying to quit smoking, you don't go to have 1 or 2 a day because you lose it.
Yeah.
The same thing. If we don't need the extra oil, that's added oil. The oil in the food, I don't see any problem with it. like nuts and avocados, and
Yep.
those are good foods. But if you're going to add oil, which we do, and we add a lot, we really add a lot. All that extra oil, most of it is in the form of so-called omega-6 fats.
Mm-hmm.
Omega-6 fats are pro-inflammatory. So under those circumstances, they create conditions for disease. You add all the oil in there, you're adding pro-inflammation, if you will, instead of anti-inflammatory stuff, number one. Number two, you're displacing a lot of the calories you otherwise would get from vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
You're now getting it from this oil alone, with none of the antioxidants and none of the complex compounds. I mean, so added oil is not a good thing.
That makes
It's simply
sense.
not a good thing. And so I'm also for the 100% rule. I mean, obviously, people who got into this for ideological reasons,
Mm-hmm.
maybe because they don't want to eat animals, good reasons. But they I think if they're going to live by their code or their beliefs, it should be 100% all the time. Because how can you be? It's an ethical reason. They can't be ethical part of the time and not other part of the time. That doesn't make sense. But in science, I can end up at the same place
Mm-hmm.
as they do, but not. I can't argue that, as I said before, that 100% is absolutely necessary for 100% of the people for 100% of the time.
Yep.
We know that's not true.
What about supplements and minerals?
Well, supplements usually in the form of vitamins, but there's vitamin and mineral supplements, so the word comprehends both groups. The only time I would advocate supplements if there's a clear definition, a clear diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
of some kind of deficiency, in which case you give the supplement back and you get a positive result, okay?
Yeah.
I can imagine, sure, that's a medical usage, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's been clearly demonstrated, they do have a deficiency.
Yep.
Now, people eating the wrong food are going to sometimes have a little deficiency. Eating all that fat and all this and that.
Yep.
But still, even under those circumstances, the data we now have, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Beta carotene, which is a great antioxidant.
Yep. Color. Love it.
It is. And so we should eat foods that have all that beta carotene. There was a study, you may know it, that was done, a joint study between the United States and Finland some years ago. Beta carotene was a great antioxidant. Let's put it in pills.
Oh, no.
So they
Yes.
did a study. It actually, for smokers, this was, who were the most susceptible to this kind of effect. It turned out it increased cancer. Instead of decreasing, but in that same cohort of people, if they look for the beta carotene in the blood, coming from the food, if you will, then people consuming more beta carotene from food, their lung cancer was down. So beta carotene in pill, no. Beta carotene in food, yes. And now this has been done many times over with other vitamins too.
Now, what about minerals? The reason I separated minerals out is because there's a lot of talk today about soil depletion and about getting things like your zinc or magnesium and how hard it is to come by compared to what your parents or grandparents could have access to for food.
Well, I'm going to argue at the present time, as far as the information is concerned, I'm going to suggest that probably at least 95% of those claims is based on marketing value. It's a marketing ploy. On the other hand, there's some truth in it.
Okay.
I have no doubt about that. And so maybe it's a good hedge. Maybe it's an okay hedge, to think that way. But I mean, I'm in science, and I want to see the data. If I don't see the data, then I'm going to hold back. But in any case, it's true that the food of the present day is growing on soil that's been spoiled. We've lost a lot of topsoil in this country. And so we're now down to soil that's not so good. And certainly we're down to using soil that's been herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers and all that stuff is not a good native soil, good natural soil. So under those circumstances, we are getting food from soils that's not very good. So I'm very open to maybe in the future we'll learn more about, some value of those mineral supplements. I don't know. But that's my assessment at the present time.
Is there any fun stuff you take in your diet, like spirulina or anything interesting?
No. I mean, peaches are quite interesting. Oranges are pretty interesting, too.
Yes.
And so are
they are.
potatoes. They're all interesting.
I'm
And when
looking
you
over
get-
at my desk because usually I have a stack of orange peels from what I was just gobbling beforehand.
No, I mean, everybody, we all have our own sort of preferences. That's very clear. It's understandable. It's a good idea. And some of these superfoods that come out from time to time, I don't know. The jury's out for me on that. Because in a sense, if it's done in a certain way, it's the whole food ground down. But you get such a small amount of it. Certainly, if you put it in a pill, it's not. You eat the whole food.
Yeah.
Eat the whole food.
So before we wrap things up, you had a story about Karen earlier in your book, a friend of yours who had melanoma. That was not benign and went through kind of this, I don't know if I want to call it nightmare. She went through the typical medical process. And I'm wondering what you would say. This is bothering me lately. Let me share what's bothering me. Is I've read your books and I've read some other great books out there that are all suggesting that we can help people, may not be able to cure, but we can help people, a certain number of people who have cancer. And so what do you tell your friends when you find out that they're sick and you know something that may help? It may not, but it may.
That's a very good question. A very, very perceptive, good question. Well, I will speak strictly from the science. I can't be their physician, of course.
Right.
So, I mean, first I say pay attention to your physician. But from the scientific point of view, all from what I believe to be true. Mm-hmm. And what I believe to be true is that using a whole food, plant-based diet, doing it the right way, I have seen so many cases now of really difficult diseases being resolved, including cancers, number one. Number two, I know from our own, fundamental research, just looking at the fundamental theory and the real stuff, yeah, we could turn off cancer by nutritional means. Put those two ideas together, okay? And then finally, I also run into a lot of people, especially in my talks, people come around and tell me very emotionally oftentimes that they saved their lives by switching to this diet when they had cancer. Now, I mean, that's technically anecdotal, but nonetheless, you hear this enough. I know the basic science, and, to my way of looking at things, yeah, this is likely to work. I'm not going to promise anybody anything.
Right.
But I'm going to say the odds are if you do this, you're going to certainly feel better. And the odds are pretty, I think, that you'll see some resolution for your problem. And the more I see, the more I believe that. The biggest problem in this little discussion we just had is that in science, and I've been in the cancer research community for 50 years, half a century. In science, the people who are working on cancer with cancer patients, they have no training in nutrition. So they don't know what I know. First. Secondly, the cancer industry today is pretty well dominated, has been dominated by three kinds of treatments. Number one, chemotherapy. Number two, radiation. Number three, surgery. That's their three options. There's three tools they have. They're treating people that way. And so, on the other hand, they're also saying that cancer is caused by some odd chemicals out there in the environment, which is not true. Because that's not a holistic way of looking at things. So the whole cancer.
So I stop you for a real brief second there, because the way I've interpreted that is certainly chemicals can cause a gene to basically flip on. But if we have our systems all in place, if basically our immune system is firing at 100%, all of our chemical reactions or molecular reactions are going at 100%, that's a non-issue. It takes care of itself. It gets filtered, cleaned out, turned off, fire extinguished, gone away.
Right, that's exactly right. I don't know whether you use the word all. You said all things, but but nonetheless, the vast majority of things are going to go in the right direction.
Yeah.
By far. And it's nature at play. And what really, I say, frustrates me really enormously is that these cancer research community, and especially the cancer practice community, the oncology community, somehow they don't want to even entertain this idea that that we should even do research. Right now, I have already drafted just take advantage of this opportunity. I've already drafted with my son, who's now in a major medical school. We've drafted a proposal on doing a proper study. Really doing a proper study, and by that I mean doing it really rigorously, really well, adequate numbers of people, doing it as carefully as you can, publish in a peer-reviewed journal. Believe it or not, the cancer community has not, and I've been on the study sections to do this, they don't even want to entertain this as an idea. And I find it really puzzling and quite frankly, extremely frustrating. So I'm right now just in the business. I've already gotten some funding. I'm trying to raise money. And incidentally, let me just add one little twist to that.
Sure.
Do you know the average cost of introducing one more chemotherapy agent that gets to the market, that is, the average cost for the research and development to get that new chemotherapy agent on the market is between 1.2 and $1.3 billion.
Yeah.
Billion. Do you know what? I mean, that's a lot of money. And now we're learning, too, that the increase in survival, very careful study, is only increased by 2.1% for people who use chemotherapy. Why are we spending so much money and getting so little in return? When, in fact, all I'm asking for is to do one study, $6 million. It's peanuts. It's pocket change. I'm getting, so I got some. So I'm taking the opportunity. If anybody's interested in this here, I want the $6 million now. I got the proposal. We're ready to go, and we're going to do it. And we'll upset the apple cart beyond belief. I feel that. But, I don't know exactly what this study is going to show exactly. But I am really confident it's going to be one heck of a lot better than what we're doing now.
Do you have a way, if we all gave $1, gave $1, got to $6 million, that would be huge.
How many people do you have on your program?
I don't have 6 million listeners yet, but give it a little time. So, but if we could all just pitch in a little bit, I think for the sake of humanity and our kids, this is in our best interest.
This one thing, this one study that's never been done. If it's done properly, and I really want to emphasize, it has to be professional. It has to meet the test of the most rigorous scientific standards, right? Nothing less. I mean, anything less is, I'm not even going to entertain the idea. It has to be total, like that. And then, were we to show the kind of results that I anticipate we're going to be showing, that will change the discourse about diet and health forever.
I love
because
it.
There's one kind of disease outcome that does frighten people. It's a deep concern. And let's get on with it. Let's do it. So I want to do it. I don't have that many years left. I want to do it now. I don't want to wait around until tomorrow.
I love it. And actually, I wanted to know what is the plant-based nutrition certificate program? Yeah,
right. It's an online course. It's a course that I taught on campus for a while until it went online. My students got excited about it. So they, with rudimentary equipment at the time, put it online. Now we've got it really quite sophisticated. We have a nonprofit organization that offers this course in collaboration with the Cornell University program that builds a platform and things like that. So we're working together. And the student it's a course that we teach plant-based nutrition. And a really I think a very sort of, top of the line kind of way of teaching things. We have a virtual class. When you get a virtual class, we have instructors. We work it that way. And so right now we're really bringing it up to speed even more with the latest in the visual stuff like that. We're going to add a lot more courses too. What they get is doctors who take this or any healthcare professionals, they get 30 Category 1 continuing medical education credits.
Oh, cool.
So the doctors get, and we have a lot of doctors taking this course. Also, this course is one of 200 and some courses at Cornell, if I can do a little bit bragging. Of the 200 some courses offered for all different kind of topics, ours is number one in terms of the number of applicants that we're getting.
I love that
we're having a great time.
While there may not be the like you said, we need some more studies here. People love this stuff. People really want to learn more about it.
Right. And we're trying to do the best we can. I think one of the things about causing change in the world, and I'd like to have this information be used to cause change. I mean, we need really good professional education. There's too many other stuff going on out there that doesn't pass, and it's going to ruin the area for it if we're not careful. But it's got to be good professional education. It's got to be good professional research. I mean, I'm arguing for professionalism from A to Z. Really do it well. And because that's the only kind of... I spent about 20 years in policy development in Washington and other capitals. And I was deeply involved in, helping to develop national policy on food and health and disease and stuff like this. And I've seen the problems with that. I mean, it's too much influence.
What's the 30-second, the 10-second version of the USDA, the guidelines?
They're the government agency to promote agriculture, and that means basically livestock-based agriculture. Mm-hmm. At the same time, somehow they've been given the job of determining what to eat. If that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. The dietary guidelines really is a seriously flawed program, period.
So what do we tell our kids today, and how do we help them to eat well with what they're influenced with their friends all around them?
I would tell them to visit with some of our grandchildren. Mm-hmm. They were educated early on. They're all five. We got 5 grandchildren in college right now, all in the same university, by the way. And they were pretty much started, especially 2 of them with my wife. She was involved. They have never had any meat cross their lips. They don't drink milk, none of that stuff. When they went to school, people were saying, oh, the kids are going to pick on them and stuff like that. They were so knowledgeable at that point in time, I guess, and so convinced they would go to school with their lunch bags and stuff like that and show off, their sort of plant-based foods. Mm-hmm. And so they became great ambassadors in the school. They were proud of what they were doing. Not overbearing. They don't have to be that way, but they were sort of quite pleased with what they're doing. And they went on to school, and in high school they were really top, A1 athletes. Mm-hmm. And then went on to college.
Well, I can see you're very proud of them, and that's great.
Oh yeah, of course I am. but I think they've done very well.
Excellent, and we can all learn from that, because it's a biggie. It's a biggie, particularly when parents are listening to this and going, okay, this makes some sense, and I'm going to do some homework and may well make some changes. How in the world do I implement this in my house? So,
well, one more thing. Give this opportunity. There's 2 cookbooks. Mm-hmm. One is called the China Study Cookbook. Yep. By our daughter. In fact, she's already held a couple conferences, and another one's coming up, and she's out touring right now, talking all about this. So her cookbook, and then with the film Plant Pure Nation. Yep. That's our son Nelson directing that. His wife Kim has a Plant Pure Nation cookbook, and they're setting up this thing, and that both of those books. I mean, just get into the books and use them.
Beautiful. And we'll get links to that on our website so people can find out, because if you're driving down the road, you won't be remembering the name of the documentary, the books. We'll have that. And it's nutritionstudies.org. Is that your website as well?
Yes, nutritionstudies.org. Just tell them to go on. There's articles on there and all kinds of stuff. My son, who's at University of Rochester Medical Center, he works on it, and we have a great staff right now too. I mean, it's just fantastic.
Fantastic. So a wrap-up question we like to ask all of our guests at the end, which is, what brings you personally the greatest sense of happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Well, I just see, I can't believe, actually, I mean, it's gone, the effect of this message, this information has gone far beyond what I ever expected. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing more gratifying than see people just recover their health, either for themselves or for their family. I mean, my gosh. And of course, then you look at it at a societal level, too. I just say there's so much we can accomplish. Even the environmental issue right now is a big deal. largely attributed to raising livestock.
That blew me away, that you have a statistic in there. 51% could be the amount of greenhouse gases associated with livestock. I didn't realize that.
51% or more, certainly more than transportation, all like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was done by my late friend who was the senior advisor on the environment to the president of the World Bank. And I gave some lecture at the World Bank, and he was there in a very good position to make this point. He and his younger colleague wrote this article, I think now 6 or 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's yet to be, I mean, you kind of have to guess your way through some of these numbers, I think. We need better numbers, but that 51% figure is staggering.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah.
So any last words of wisdom or guidance you want to give for people listening?
Well, as I said, Tom and I said in our book, you don't need to believe me. A lot of this is technical stuff. You don't need to believe me. Just try it. Just try it. Figure out how to put the food together and make some delicious meals, and don't add back a lot of oil and sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. The refined carbohydrates. It takes a little while to adapt to this new taste for a lot of people. It might take a month or 2 or 3, I don't know. But the current diet that people are now consuming, high in fat and all the rest, sweet and all, that's an addiction. And so like any other kinds of addictions, you guys should wean yourself off of it. A lot of people get into it overnight.
I know for myself, I heard it recently by another guest we had on. The term is junk vegetarian.
Vegan. Yeah, junk vegan.
Yeah, vegan or junk vegetarian, and that was me. And so to come off of that, first off, I went full cycle. I ended up for a little while. I tried going off the vegan wagon, going paleo, going ketone, going everything, coming back. But then I had to get my taste buds to actually calm down enough that I could taste things. So now a potato tastes on its own. A potato tastes amazing.
It is. It's delicious, right? Yeah.
On its own. I pick it up like I'm eating an apple. It's radical.
That's right.
What food tastes like.
That's right. We recover those tastes long lost.
Mm-hmm.
We begin to rediscover the real taste of food, and it's delicious eating food.
So I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I want to thank you for your work. Everyone out there, I can't recommend Whole enough and China Study. Whole is really going to, it's kind of a mind blower.
Well, we are getting quite a lot of feedback that's a little bit more in depth. Of course, we're trying to there, and universities are picking it up.
Mm-hmm.
For textbooks and stuff. It's quite gratifying.
I love that because it really, and it is not your lightest read, and it's much more in understanding the paradigms, the fishbowl that we're stuck within.
Right.
Whether it's medical, supplements, pharmaceutical, even goes well outside of that, environmental, all of the different fishbowls.
Yep.
Still a fun read.
It's big time.
Yep.
One last thing, just to maybe anybody interested in this cancer research project we want to do, that is so significant.
And go get in touch with you through Nutritional Study. Through
nutritionstudies.org, exactly.
Perfect. And we'll get that link on there to get them over as well. And we'll mention that on our website too, because if you can get that rolling, not if you can get that rolling, when you get that rolling, it's going to be awesome.
Right.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, live whole, eat whole, and get whole, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you.
Thank you. This is beautiful. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!